Something just happened after the Australian Grand Prix that could completely change the start of the 2026 Formula One season. Mercedes dominated the race in Melbourne. Pole position, fastest pace, and a perfect 1-2 finish with George Russell winning and Kimi Antonelli right behind him. On the surface, it looked like the dream start to a championship campaign. But only hours after the race ended, Red Bull reportedly presented new technical evidence to the FIA about the Mercedes power unit. And the numbers behind that evidence are raising serious questions across the paddock. Because analysts believe the Mercedes engine may have an advantage of nearly 30 horsepower in certain acceleration phases. 30 horsepower. In modern Formula One, that kind of advantage can decide an entire championship. Ferrari has already admitted they are nowhere near the pace of the Mercedes in Australia. Red Bull finished more than 50 seconds behind the leaders. And now engineers are trying to understand one thing. How did Mercedes find this much performance so quickly under completely new regulations? Some teams believe the answer may be hidden deep inside the hybrid energy deployment system of the new M17 power unit. A detail buried inside the 2026 rulebook. A detail that most fans watching the race completely missed. But once you see it, the entire Australian Grand Prix suddenly looks very different. Because the real story might not be the Mercedes 1-2. The real story might be what happens next if the FIA decides to investigate. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Red Bull believes Mercedes may have discovered something that could shake the entire championship. So if you want to understand the hidden battle that may already be starting behind the scenes of Formula One, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because this season has only just begun. Right after the race in Melbourne ended, most fans were celebrating what looked like the perfect start for Mercedes. George Russell standing on the top step of the podium. Kimi Antonelli beside him in second place. A dominant 1-2 finish in the very first race of the 2026 season. For Mercedes, it was exactly the beginning they needed in a completely new era of Formula One. But inside the paddock, engineers were already asking a very different question. How did Mercedes become this fast, this quickly? Because the advantage they showed in Australia was not small. Russell did not win by luck. He controlled the race. After the first virtual safety car and the perfectly timed double pit stop, he simply managed the gap from the front until the finish line. That kind of control in the opening race of a new regulation era is unusual. Normally the first races are chaotic. Teams are still learning the new systems. Drivers are still discovering the limits of the cars. But the Mercedes W17 did not look like a car that was still learning. It looked like a car that already understood the rules better than everyone else. And that became clear from the very first practice sessions. George Russell immediately set the fastest lap times during the weekend. In the final practice session he was more than half a second faster than the nearest Ferrari. In Formula One, half a second is enormous. Especially when every team is working with brand new engines and brand new energy systems. Then came qualifying. And once again, the Mercedes looked untouchable. Russell delivered a near-perfect lap to take pole position. Right behind him, Kimi Antonelli completed the front row. A Mercedes lockout. That moment alone sent a clear message to the rest of the grid. Mercedes had arrived in 2026 with something very strong. But Sunday's race revealed something even more interesting. Because the biggest difference between Mercedes and the rest of the field did not appear in the corners. It appeared under acceleration. Every time Russell activated the new overtake mode, the Mercedes suddenly surged forward. Not just slightly faster. Noticeably faster. Out of slow corners, the car looked extremely powerful. And that detail did not go unnoticed by rival engineers. Because in the 2026 regulations, energy deployment from the hybrid system is tightly controlled. Every team has limits on how electrical energy can be deployed during acceleration. So when one car suddenly appears stronger in those exact moments, engineers immediately start asking questions. And that is exactly what Red Bull engineers reportedly started doing after the race. They began analyzing the telemetry data from the Australian Grand Prix. Every sector. Every acceleration phase. Every moment where electrical energy was released. And according to reports circulating in the paddock, they believe the Mercedes power unit behaves differently from the rest of the field. Not necessarily illegal, but different enough to raise serious curiosity. Some analysts believe the advantage may come from the way Mercedes manages the interaction between the combustion engine and the electrical deployment system. In simple terms, the car may be able to release energy in short bursts more efficiently than other teams. And those bursts of acceleration were exactly what allowed Russell to control the race once he reached the front. Meanwhile, Red Bull had a much more difficult afternoon. Max Verstappen finished only 6th, more than 50 seconds behind the winning Mercedes. That result alone shocked many fans, because Red Bull had been expected to fight for victories in the new era. Instead, they looked like they were chasing from the very first race. After the race, Verstappen admitted something that confirmed the situation. Red Bull, he said, is simply not the fastest car right now. And if they want to fight for wins, they need to become much faster. But inside the team, there is a deeper concern. Because if Mercedes truly found a technical advantage inside the new engine regulations, catching them could become extremely difficult. And that is exactly why Red Bull's reported evidence to the FIA suddenly becomes such an important story. Because if that evidence leads to a deeper technical review, the dominant performance we saw in Australia might only be the beginning of a much bigger controversy. And the next block of this story explains why Ferrari is quietly asking the same questions as Red Bull, which makes the situation around the Mercedes engine even more serious. But the story did not stop with Red Bull. Because after the Australian Grand Prix, another team quietly admitted something that made the situation even more interesting. Ferrari. Charles Leclerc spoke openly after qualifying, and his words immediately caught the attention of everyone in the paddock. Ferrari, he said, was nowhere near Mercedes in terms of pace. Not a few hundredths behind. Not a small gap that could disappear with a better lap. A big difference. He even explained that even with a perfect lap, Ferrari would probably still be far from the Mercedes performance. That kind of statement is unusual in Formula One. Drivers rarely admit that another team is clearly ahead. But Leclerc did. And he pointed to one specific area: the engine. According to Ferrari's early analysis, the Mercedes power unit appears to deliver much more performance than expected under the new regulations. That observation suddenly connects with what Red Bull engineers were already investigating. Because if two different teams reach the same conclusion independently, it usually means there is something worth studying more closely. Ferrari noticed the advantage during qualifying. Red Bull focused on it during the race. Both observations lead to the same place: the Mercedes power unit. And the numbers behind that engine have already been the subject of speculation for months. Even before the season began, some analysts suggested that Mercedes might have discovered something special in the way the new hybrid system manages energy deployment. The 2026 regulations changed the balance between the combustion engine and electrical power. More energy now comes from the electrical side of the system, which means the software that manages that energy has become incredibly important. If one team finds a smarter way to deploy that energy during acceleration, the advantage can be enormous. Especially on circuits like Albert Park. Street circuits are full of slow corners. Slow corners mean heavy acceleration zones. And those zones are exactly where electrical deployment makes the biggest difference. Throughout the race in Melbourne, the Mercedes appeared extremely strong in those moments. Every time Russell exited a slow corner, the car seemed to surge forward with remarkable force. That surge is exactly what engineers measure in telemetry data. Acceleration curves, energy deployment timing, battery discharge patterns. Those details tell engineers everything about how a power unit behaves. And according to reports from inside the paddock, those curves from the Mercedes look different from the rest of the field. Not wildly different, but different enough to trigger serious curiosity. Some technical analysts believe the advantage could come from how Mercedes coordinates the combustion engine with the electrical motor. Others suspect the answer might lie deeper inside the engine architecture itself. There have even been whispers about compression efficiency and thermal management giving the Mercedes engine an additional performance window. If that sounds extremely complex, it is. Modern Formula One power units are among the most complicated engines ever built. They combine combustion, electrical systems, advanced software, and energy recovery systems working together in real time. A tiny improvement in how those systems interact can produce a significant advantage on track. Which brings us back to Red Bull. Because the team reportedly believes that advantage may be larger than what the regulations intended. Not necessarily illegal, but possibly exploiting a gray area inside the rulebook. And Formula One history is full of moments like this. The double diffuser, flexible wings, the famous blown diffusers of the past. Sometimes a team simply interprets the rules better than everyone else. But when that happens, rivals often push the FIA to take a closer look. Which is exactly where the situation now stands after the Australian Grand Prix. Mercedes has the fastest car. George Russell leads the championship after the first race. Kimi Antonelli has already secured a podium in the opening weekend of the new era. But behind the scenes, engineers from rival teams are studying the data from Melbourne very carefully. Because if the performance advantage of the Mercedes power unit is real, then the entire competitive order of the 2026 season could already be taking shape. And the next question everyone inside the paddock is asking is simple. What will the FIA do next? Because if the governing body decides to review the evidence that Red Bull has reportedly presented, the dominant Mercedes performance we saw in Australia might only be the beginning of a much larger story. And this is where the situation becomes even more uncomfortable for Mercedes. Because the moment a rival team submits technical evidence to the FIA, the story stops being just paddock speculation. It becomes a potential regulatory issue. Inside Formula One, teams constantly analyze each other. Every lap is studied. Every piece of telemetry is compared. But when a team decides to bring that analysis to the FIA, it usually means they believe something important is happening. And according to several paddock reports after the Australian Grand Prix, Red Bull engineers have been closely studying the acceleration data of the Mercedes W17. Not the cornering speed. Not the tire degradation. The acceleration bursts. Those short moments when the hybrid system releases electrical energy to support the combustion engine. Because in modern Formula One, that moment is everything. The 2026 regulations shifted a much larger portion of performance to the electrical side of the power unit. Which means whoever controls that energy best controls the race pace. And in Melbourne, Mercedes looked extremely comfortable in exactly those moments. Out of slow corners. Out of traction zones. Moments where the car needs maximum electrical deployment. Russell's Mercedes seemed to surge forward more aggressively than the cars behind him. It was not just visible on television. It appeared clearly in the sector times. Especially in the sections of the circuit where acceleration matters most. And that is why engineers from several teams started studying the numbers immediately after the race finished. Because when a new regulation era begins, the first race often reveals who has understood the rules best. And in Australia, it looked like Mercedes had found something very effective. Possibly something that other teams had not yet discovered. Ferrari openly admitted that the gap to Mercedes was larger than expected. Leclerc explained that even a perfect qualifying lap would probably not have closed the difference. Red Bull had an even more difficult afternoon. Max Verstappen finished 6th, more than 50 seconds behind the winning Mercedes. For a driver who has dominated entire seasons in the past, that result felt unusual. And inside Red Bull, engineers immediately started asking the obvious question. Is Mercedes simply better prepared for the new regulations? Or have they discovered something hidden inside the rulebook? Because Formula One history shows that the biggest advantages often come from interpretation. Small details in the regulations. Technical wording that allows a creative solution. Solutions that remain legal until the FIA decides to clarify the rules. That is exactly why Red Bull's reported evidence matters so much. If their analysis suggests that the Mercedes engine is operating in a way that pushes the boundaries of the regulations, the FIA could take several different steps.